Welcome back to the Back Pain Solutions Podcast with me, Ben James, and my good friend and co-host, Jacob Steyn. Good afternoon, Jacob. It's been a
Uh,
while since we've had a joint call.
hey Ben, welcome. Yeah, thank you for the welcome. It's been a while, and it's nice to speak again with you.
Great. Well, today we're going to talk about the lats specifically, or the latissimus dorsi muscle, and specifically why that's important and why that's often kind of just not considered by patients, not even thought about when we're looking at core strength, core stability, stabilization. We talked a lot over the years on these podcasts about the importance of core stiffness, core stability, neutral spine, etc. And even now, when I see patients in clinic, Jacob, you'll be the same. We talk about the core and they say, oh, that's the ab muscles then, that's the ab muscles. And we kind of educate that we're looking at the barrel of muscles that surround the spine that contribute to stiffness. And the latissimus dorsi muscles are an important aspect of that. So we felt that it was relevant to discuss that specifically today, and how we should be mindful of that when we're looking at exercises. So, Jacob, your initial thoughts on this? Is this something that you find yourself talking to patients about a lot? Is it something that patients don't consider? It's certainly something I see.
Definitely working with it a lot. Generally, when I do rehab for shoulders, I would be activating pec, lat, serratus, and the muscles that supports the shoulder girdle. But I mean, coming back to the core, it's I think fundamental to core stability. At least when I give personal training or when we work in the CrossFit gym, we have our own designed on ramp. In other words, preparation for the CrossFit classes, and there we have exercises that we teach the new members to activate the lats. So we lay a lot of emphasis on lat activation, in other words, compression of the spine, and how to do it properly with a neutral spine. But yeah, so I with my patients, I um, more when I do the functional stuff, I go in on working an activation of the lats, and when I have new patients, it's very obvious to me whether they have lat activation going or where there's maybe a complete uh, no communication from the brain to the lats, and that makes things more difficult.
Yeah, and I wonder whether, in some instances, I think there's an education thing around it, back health, of course, in general, but it's a muscle that we often, I guess, just don't consider as part of the core. It's a muscle that people will often maybe look at and see guys, girls in the gym with that kind of classic V shape. That maybe they look at that it's a bit more aesthetic. I don't know, but I think we can recognize the importance of this muscle when we consider where this muscle kind of originates and where it inserts when we're looking at the kind of anatomy of the muscle, because it's not just a muscle that is in the kind of armpit region, that kind of that V shape as I mentioned. This muscle starts right at the base of the back. So, for those listening, we can't underestimate the contribution that this muscle provides for back stability and why it's so important. So the muscle itself will originate right at the lower back in the pelvic area. So on the kind of medial aspect of the pelvis, so the big bones that obviously are at the base of the spine. And then it's attached to all of the spinous processes. So those bony bits you'll see, classic images of a spine that poke out the back of the back. They attach to all of those spinous processes in the lumbar spine, and from the 7th through 12th spinous process of the thoracic spine, so the mid-back. So it also originates at the thoracolumbar fascia. This is a big connective tissue that is important. And if you ever read any Stuart McGill's work, he kind of often will focus on this thoracolumbar fascia, the importance of that with respect to back health. So the muscle inserts into that fascia, and then to the lower three ribs. So the lower three ribs, and in some instances, not all cases, but the inferior aspect of the scapula, so can contribute to stability at the shoulder, and then it will insert into the kind of back of the upper arm. So that muscle attaches to some very key bony anatomy structures that will quite evidently, when we kind of visualize that, contribute to stability. Because if you imagine, as you brace the arms and you tense that muscle, so if I'm locking my arms kind of back, if you can see me on the for those that are watching on YouTube, as I'm locking my arms back, I'm stiffening that muscle, and then it's contributing that stability right the way through the ribs, down through the mid back into the lower back and pelvis. So if you're doing any kind of activities, whether that's a deadlift, a squat, those big heavy lifting exercises, you cannot disregard the lats and the ability or the importance of contracting and activating that muscle for stability through the back, and also optimizing the lift. Because without that, then how are you stabilizing those shoulders on your back and therefore preventing flexion through the spine, etc.? It's almost, well, it's impossible to do, right, Jacob, without consideration of that muscle.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. Look, we talk about a deadlift and squat, but even when we come back to a push-pull, so we have a push-pull with the arm. That push-pull originates in terms of movement from a stable place, and that's the core. So we push from the core. The core in this case is actually connected to the ground, because the force comes from the ground, from our feet on the floor. But we have a stable axis in the middle, and that's the core. And so the push-pull is so dependent on the stability in our core. We open and close a heavy door, for example, in everyday life. So we're not in a gym, we're just doing something regular. Then that push-pull movement can be a very aberrant movement or a very controlled movement. And the lat in that instance, whether it's push or pull, is incredibly important, because that connection, for example, from the shoulder blade down to the core is enormously important. And if it's a broken movement, either the shoulder's going to suffer there or the back's going to suffer there, right? Yeah. So the thing is, just if we're looking at the lat, we have to have a very specific approach in terms of activating it.
Yes, because I think this is one of the key things as well, is because of the underutilization of the muscle. If I ask you to tense your bicep, or a patient to tense a bicep, we can generally do that quite easily. But ask somebody to tense the lat, to activate it without actually almost coaching them through it and activate it. They find it very difficult, and this is kind of concerning when we just simply look at those activities of daily living. Because you mentioned the pull and the door. The amount of people that we're not stabilizing and pulling a door to us with the arm, we're just rotating through the back. So if you've got a bit of an unstable back, if you're in acute pain now, or you're experiencing a chronic issue, and you're not tensing that kind of lat muscle and activating that lat muscle, then arguably every time you open a door or do anything that involves opening the door, going through a door, you could be rotating and pivoting through the back, keeping the tissues in the low back, arguably the discs, let's say for argument's sake, irritated, sensitized. And you could be doing a lot of exercises, doing a lot of the right things, but that simple activity is contributing to your continued suffering, if you like. And so I think you're right, Jacob. Having those simple exercises to learn to activate the lats is really helpful. And I no doubt you use a similar exercise to me. But have you got any thoughts? For people listening, people watching, how can you learn to just activate the lats and be a little bit more mindful and get that feedback to create that bit of tension through the lats, so that we can help people listening today from the end of this episode just start to be mindful of this muscle and get that little bit of feedback as to whether they're activating it well or not?
I think the first step would be to try and see if you can, and I think a lot of people need some guidance when it comes to this, but you want to be able to feel the lat turn on. So if I'm sitting here and I'm squeezing my lat, I know that's my lat. I can feel the connection between my shoulder blade down to my low back, and if you would stand upright and you'd have your hands next to your side and you push your hands down, you're going to activate your lats.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
So
you
you're
want to
kind
get
of drawing your hands towards the floor, kind of.
drawing my hands towards the floor, but the thing is, I'm going to activate a lot more than just my lats. I'm going to activate my pecs, my chest muscles. I'm going to activate some muscles around my shoulder blade. Probably going to activate my lower back muscles. You know, that's okay. The next really good exercise to activate the lats, I would say, is the lat spread. So it's a kind of bodybuilding exercise because they're really good at tensing their muscles. It's the one where you're, kind of making a sort of spreading your elbows, putting your hands against each other, and then you're putting your hands in front of your belly and you drop your shoulders. So you're really pushing your shoulders down and you're pushing
Yes.
your hands into each other. And as I drop my shoulders down and I push my hands into each other, my pecs are coming on, but my lats are also coming on
Yes.
reciprocally, right? And then the idea is to slowly remove or bring the hands apart from each other, but maintain the tension in my lats.
Yes.
That's how it starts. So that I eventually can tense a lat without having to give resistance to a hand or giving a pulling effect to my arm. But I can just isometrically contract my lat. That's when I can take a heavy door and with an instance just activate my lat, pull with my lat, and really feel the
Yes.
strength and the protection that lats can offer me. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and I use a similar exercise. I find as well when you're standing, drawing the hands to the ground. If you're kind of visualizing this or in fact doing it, standing, draw the hands to the ground. If you turn your kind of palms face forward as well at the same time, you can get a little bit more feedback and feel that lat a little bit more.
Yeah.
But it is useful just to do as a we kind of call it grooving the motor patterns. You're trying to train in your brain to start to feel that muscle again and start to use that muscle again. And then if you start to do that activation exercise, and Jacob, sometimes I'll get patients, right, do this 2-3 times a day, do it 4 times, really push those hands together, 100% of your effort, and then just try and keep that muscle switched on as you separate those hands. We're just trying to get that neural feedback so that we can start to train you to consciously use the muscle, but repetitively that becomes a subconscious habit. And we talk about this a lot. I certainly do in clinic. We're making conscious effort becomes subconscious habit. So then when you are starting to do certain activities like going through a heavy door, you're thinking, okay, tense through the muscles of my tummy, lock my shoulders down and pull the door to me with my arm and that muscle in the upper back. And you will get that tension of other muscles as well, of course. But now you can start to, for very simple activities of daily living, start to use that muscle a little bit more. Because by doing that, it's amazing, and I see this with patients when I get feedback. When they start to do this consistently, there is a really, really strong kind of feeling of resilience that you get from doing that. And if you then start to, if you are doing any lifting in the gym, so for those that do squats, deadlifts, or considering it, did it in the past and don't anymore, but if you start to activate the lats when you do these exercises, it's amazing how stiff and strong that you can make yourself feel by just incorporating these muscles, particularly the lats, into that activity. And
Yeah.
I think it's the same with other exercises like the side plank, which we will often prescribe as part of a rehabilitation plan, depending on what stage you're at. The side plank's fantastic to build that core stiffness, build that endurance through the core. But oftentimes, Jacob, I've seen this a lot, same with the plank, patients will be very much focused on the abs, and there's an element maybe for a different episode in terms of breathing while you do these exercises. A lot of people will tense through the core and hold their breath, and I'm like, remember to breathe as you're doing this. But they're not activating the lats. That's one of the first muscles I go to say, right, get that feedback. I want you to really squeeze that muscle in that kind of armpit area to contribute to this plank. Don't just focus on that core. This is, again, something I see quite a lot, even in those activities or exercises that seem quite simple. Patients are not creating that stiffness from the lats down through the side plank and even the plank itself. bird dog as well, on the hands and knees, that exercise. It's really, really something that requires a lot of kind of coaching and feedback, in my experience, to really get them to engage that muscle effectively.
And the lat is not a muscle on its own that we say, look, you got to take care of the lat and things are going to go better. The lat is part of the synergy of the muscles that provide trunk stability. But
Sure.
the lat is quite often a very good indicator of how it's actually going with your low back. Because if we look at a low back, or we look at somebody's back in general, and we see that there's some rounding of the upper back, shoulders are protracted, elevated, then there's a disconnect between the upper back and the low back. And the disconnect will be resembled in the function of the lat. So lat will be, as we say, generally been on holiday. It will not be present. It will not be used. It's not part of the program that the brain uses to create connection between the upper back and the lower back. So the stability from the upper back to the lower back is is in danger, and that actually endangers the low back, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the stability of the low back is really that connection between the upper back, low back, and the low back and the pelvic muscles, the glutes and the hip flexors, and they all go together. And that connection between the low back and the upper back in this case is the lat, just as you would consider how important the glutes are in terms of supporting and bending through the hips, protecting the low back. Because if the glutes are not doing their job, which is the case with a lot of people, low back's got to take over. So we've got to get these low back muscles to
Yeah.
create the hinge, because the glutes just are not up to it. Well, they might
Yes.
be up to it 2-3 times, but if you have a job at home or you're working in the garden, you got to lift things repeatedly, and the glutes are not up for this job, they're going to give in, and eventually your low back muscle is going to take over, and it's going to cause a lot of stress through the spine. And a similar thing between the upper back and the low back. So in reality, we can activate them with a couple of simple exercises. But if you're somebody that goes to a gym or you train regularly, it has to be something that you incorporate into your training, with the idea that if you have proper function of the lat, but also this control from your brain when you want to use it, then you've got an advantage.
Yes. Yeah. And I think as well, you mentioned about the upper back and that kind of stabilization of upper back and lower back. The shoulders as well, stabilizing the shoulders onto the core, if you like, and this extends even further to sporting activities like tennis, throwing, cricket, where if you're not aware of that kind of control and that stabilization of the shoulder, locking down onto the core, even with a throwing exercise, you want that lats to engage, because otherwise you're risking shoulder health and shoulder injuries as a result of the lack of activation of this muscle. So it's stabilizing the shoulders on the core, it's stabilizing the upper body on the lower body. There's based on the anatomy as we know, that kind of transition of this muscle right down through to the lower back. So it's not just back health and back stabilization, and it's around shoulder stability, and ultimately such a fundamentally important muscle that we cannot underestimate it. And unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, if not more, patients I see clinically are not aware of this muscle, not able to simply activate this muscle, and are certainly not even activating this muscle, so doing some of the exercises that we would want them to do for low back rehabilitation. So we really cannot underestimate. It's an important part of the kind of coaching process, if you like, but it's certainly something that you shouldn't underestimate. And if we review this simply, anatomically, fundamentally important when we look at that muscle, from the base of the lower back, from the pelvis, up through the lower back, through the spinous processes, right up through the mid back, stabilizing by contacting through the lower 3 ribs each side, and then up through that lower part of the scapula, the shoulder blade, and into the back of the arm. It's a big, big, big muscle that extends across a substantial part of the back. So clearly, activation of that muscle is important. Anatomically, it just makes sense, and we know based on evidence it's really important. So we can't underestimate it, and you have to learn to activate it. And simple exercises that Jacob guided us through will allow you to do that. So from today, just start to be mindful, whether you've got a lower back issue or whether you're just listening to this episode out of interest, you go to the gym regularly or you partake in sports, you really want to be aware of activating the lats. So standing upright, drawing those shoulders to the floor, palms forward gives you a little bit more activation. And then standing upright, hands together, really pushing those hands together as hard as you can to activate chest muscles and the latissimus muscle, so that we can start to consciously activate that over time becomes subconscious habit. Because then, if we incorporate that into other exercises, very important for any rehabilitation plan, but if we incorporate that into other exercises, squats, deadlifts at the gym, not only will you protect your back, but you will absolutely optimize that activity and be able to lift more if that is your goal. So we thought it a really relevant topic to discuss, specifically because we're just seeing a lot in practice, and we talked about the core a lot previously. As Jacob says, we're not just trying to activate the lats in isolation. It performs, it contributes, it combines with other muscles, but we just need to have more focus on it. So the next time you're opening a door, the next time that you are doing those simple activities daily, just be mindful of drawing those shoulders down, tensing a little bit, and starting to activate this muscle, because it will absolutely help you if you are suffering. So as always, we thank you for listening. Send us your questions, info@smartstrong.co.uk, or jump on the website at www.smartstrong.co.uk. Download our ebook. We've had fantastic feedback on that. We encourage you to download and read that. And as always, reach out to us if you want to have an exploratory call. We're always here to help. We're getting some great feedback on the courses and the coaching, and that's why we do what we do. So thanks for listening, and we appreciate you. Nice.